The first warning came from Europa Station at 03 for 7 hours. Terran's standard time of burst transmission that lasted exactly for seconds. Before the signal died forever, contact lost with all outer moon installations, announced Lieutenant Commander Vex Korath from her position at the Deep Fleet Command Center. Buried 3 kilometers beneath the Mariana Trench, her cybernetic eye flickered as she processed incoming data streams. Ganymede, Callisto, Titan all dark. No debris signatures, no distress beacons. They just stopped. Admiral Nia Thorne stood motionless before the massive holographic display, watching red dots blink out one by one across the Sol system's outer reaches. Each dot represented thousands of lives, entire cities carved into ice and rock. Humanity's first steps toward the stars. Now they were gone, erased as cleanly as deleting files from a computer. How long since the last transmission? Thorne asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen 3 wars and hoped never to see a 4th. 17 minutes, Admiral. The pattern suggests a coordinated strike moving inward from the Kuiper Belt. Whatever's out there, they're methodical. The Deep Fleet had been humanity's most closely guarded secret. For 60 years, a network of submarine cities and underwater shipyards that existed far below Earth's surface, invisible to orbital scans and protected by the crushing depths of the ocean itself. While the galaxy saw humanity as a species that had barely mastered interplanetary travel, the truth lay hidden in the absolute darkness where pressure could crush starships and cold could freeze plasma. Sir, called out tactical specialist Dre Von Heim, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. We're detecting massive gravitational anomalies at the edge of the system. Whatever these ships are using for propulsion, it's bending space-time itself. Thorne nodded grimly. The Deep Fleet's advanced sensors, disguised as oceanic research equipment, had been tracking unusual readings for months. Strange gravitational waves, exotic particle signatures, the subtle distortions that marked the passage of vessels far beyond human technology. The Admiralty had hoped these were natural phenomena. They had been wrong. Bring the fleet to alert. Status Crimson, Thorne commanded. Begin emergency ascent procedures for all active vessels. I want every hunter-killer submarine and carrier group combat-ready within the hour. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as dozens of officers initiated protocols that had never been tested in actual combat. Far above them, concealed launch bays began their slow rise from ocean trenches. Pressurized docks started cycling their massive doors, and sleeping crews throughout the Deep Fleet network received the one signal they had trained for, but prayed would never come. Captain Jex Radner, commanding the heavy cruiser Absol Fury, felt the familiar vibration as his ship's engines came online deep within the Puerto Rico Trench. His crew of 200 had been running silent patrol operations for 18 months, their vessel disguised as a deep-sea mining platform. Now the charade was over. All hands. Battle stations, Radner announced over the ship's communication system. This is not a drill. Unknown hostile forces have eliminated our outer system colonies. We are now the last line of defense for Earth. The Absol Fury was one of 4 to 7 capital ships in the Deep Fleet, each one a masterpiece of engineering that combined submarine stealth technology with the most advanced weaponry humanity had ever developed. Plasma torpedoes that could travel through both water and space, gravitational cannon that manipulated local space-time, defensive shields powered by the thermal energy of underwater volcanic vents, weapon systems that the rest of humanity didn't even know existed. As Thorne watched her fleet prepare for the impossible, she thought about the billions of people living their lives on the surface, unaware that their entire species balanced on the edge of extinction. The outer colonies had been humanity's pride, proof that they belonged among the stars. Their destruction sent a clear message. Whoever was coming considered humans nothing more than an infestation to be cleaned away. Admiral, Korath reported. Long-range sensors show the hostile fleet changing course. They're accelerating toward Earth. How long until they arrive? At current velocity, 36 hours. Thorne stared at the tactical display, calculating odds that grew worse with every passing second. The Deep Fleet was powerful, but it had been designed for defense and stealth operations, not fleet engagement against an unknown enemy with superior technology. Still, humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and a dozen near extinctions. They would survive this too, or die fighting. Signal all vessels, she said quietly. Begin surface protocols. It's time the galaxy learned what humans keep in their deepest waters. 28 hours later, the first alien vessels breached Earth's outer sensor grid. Captain Radner stood on the bridge of the HFY as it rose through the final kilometers of ocean, water streaming from its angular hull as it breached the surface under cover of darkness. Around him, 46 other deep fleet vessels emerged from trenches and thermal vents across the globe, their stealth systems active, their weapons primed. "Contact," announced sensor operator Mira Koskov, her voice tight with tension. 12 vessels, configuration unknown, bearing down on Luna's orbital path. "They're Admiral, they're enormous." The main display flickered to life, showing the alien fleet in horrifying detail. Each ship stretched nearly 15 kilometers in length, their hulls a writhing mass of organic curves and metallic angles that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Bioships, living vessels that pulsed with their own heartbeats, their weapon ports dilating like hungry mouths. "Xenerch supremacy," whispered Communications Officer Lara Vask, her face pale as she processed intercepted transmissions. "They call themselves the Xenerch supremacy. They've been cataloging us for decades, watching our expansion, studying our technology, waiting for the right moment to harvest what they call useful genetic material before sterilizing the system." Admiral Thorne's voice crackled over the fleet communication network. "All vessels, maintain stealth protocols until my command. Let them come closer. They think they're hunting primitives. Show them what primitives can do when they're backed." Into a corner, the alien fleet moved with predatory confidence, their vessels spreading into a hunting formation designed to trap any fleeing survivors. They had done this before, Radner realized, probably hundreds of times across dozens of systems. To them, this was just another day's work. "Range to 100,000 kilometers and closing," Koskov reported. "They're scanning the surface, targeting major population centers. Hold position," Thorne commanded. "Wait for my signal." The lead Xenerch vessel, a massive biocruiser that pulsed with sickly green light, began charging what could only be a planetary bombardment weapon. Energy readings spiked across every spectrum as the alien ship prepared to turn New York City into a crater. "Now," Thorne whispered. The night sky exploded into violence. 47 deep fleet vessels dropped their stealth systems simultaneously, appearing on every sensor screen like ghosts materializing from the void. The HFY fired first, a gravitational cannon shot that warped space-time itself, creating a localized black hole that lasted for exactly 1.3 seconds, long enough to tear through the biocruiser's hull and detonate its core reactors. The alien ship died screaming, literally screaming, its death cry broadcast across subspace frequencies as living tissue was flash-frozen and torn apart by its own weapons. Green ichor sprayed into vacuum as the massive vessel broke apart, its component organisms writhing in their final moments. But the Xenerch response was immediate and brutal. Bioplasma erupted from 11 surviving alien vessels, streams of weaponized organic matter that ate through armor and converted metal into more of themselves. The destroyer Deep Current took a direct hit to its port side, and Captain Korvek watched in horror as the bioplasma began consuming his ship from the inside out. "All hands, abandon ship," Korvek shouted over the communication system, but it was too late. The bioplasma reached the reactor core, and the Deep Current vanished in a ball of superheated gas and expanding organic matter. "Evasive maneuvers," Radner commanded as his own ship rolled away from incoming fire. "Return fire, all weapons." The space around Earth became a hellscape of exotic energies and impossible physics. Human plasma torpedoes, designed to function in both atmosphere and vacuum, carved through alien hulls, while bioweapons responded by literally eating through ship armor. The heavy cruiser thermal vent unleashed its full arsenal, 16 gravitational cannons, firing in sequence only to watch in disbelief as one of the alien vessels simply absorbed the gravitational distortions and grew larger. "They're adaptive," reported Tactical Officer Von Heim from the command center. "Their biohulls are learning to counter our weapons in real time. We need to hit them with something they can't adapt to." Admiral Thorne made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "All vessels, implement Protocol Gamma. Authorization Thorne 77 Alpha." Protocol Gamma was the Deep Fleet's most classified weapon system and network of antimatter mines that had been secretly placed throughout Earth's orbital space. Over the past 20 years, mines disguised as space debris, old satellites, even asteroids. Each one contained enough antimatter to vaporize a city. The mines activated in sequence, their signals synchronized through quantum entanglement networks. 12 alien vessels found, themselves surrounded by 38 points of absolute annihilation as matter, and antimatter collided in perfect destruction. The explosions were visible from the surface of Mars. When the light faded, 6 Xenerch bioships remained, their hulls scarred but intact. They had shielded themselves with the bodies of their smaller escorts, sacrificing their own forces to survive humanity's desperate gambit. But they had learned something about humans. In those terrible moments of mutual slaughter, these weren't the primitive prey species they had expected. These were predators who had prepared for war in the deepest, coldest, most hostile environment their planet could offer. Sir, Koskov reported, her voice barely controlled. The surviving alien vessels are withdrawing to Luna's Elfer Point. They're calling for reinforcements. Radner stared at the tactical display, counting the human losses. 7 ships destroyed, 3 more critically damaged. Nearly 4,000 crew members dead in the first 10 minutes of combat. The aliens had lost more vessels, but their reinforcements were coming from across the galaxy while humanity's deep fleet was all they had. How long until their backup arrives? Thorne asked. 16 hours, Admiral, and Sir, long-range sensors indicate at least 40 more vessels inbound. The first battle was over. Humanity had bloodied the Xenerch supremacy's nose, but the real war was about to begin. The reinforcements arrived early. Admiral Thorne stood in the deep Fleet Command Center, watching as 37 new contacts materialized at the edge of the solar system. Each one registered as massive as the original bioships, but these were different, sleeker, more predatory, their hulls bristling with weapon systems that had been specifically adapted to counter human technology. They analyzed our combat data, reported Intelligence Officer Cale Drexen, his cybernetic implants flickering as he processed intercepted Xenerch communications. Every weapon signature, every tactical maneuver, every technical specification they could extract from the wreckage. They built these new ships to kill us specifically. The surviving 40 deep fleet vessels had spent the past 16 hours in desperate preparation. Damage control teams worked around the clock to repair battle damage while weapons specialists uploaded new tactical algorithms and targeting protocols. But everyone knew the mathematics were grim. Humanity was outnumbered more than 2 to 1 by an enemy that had just demonstrated the ability to rapidly adapt their technology. Captain Radner stood on the bridge of the Absol Fury, watching his crew prepare for what might be their final battle. Plasma torpedo tubes were loaded with experimental warheads that had never been tested in combat. Gravitational cannons were being recalibrated to fire in overlapping patterns that might overwhelm adaptive defenses. And the ship's reactor was running at 110% capacity, well beyond safe operational parameters. Sir, called out Navigator Jorg Fane, we're receiving a transmission from the Xenerch fleet. They want to talk. The main screen shimmered and resolved into the image of something that had once been humanoid, but had been so extensively modified that it barely qualified as organic anymore. Cables and biomechanical interfaces sprouted from its skull. Its eyes had been replaced with multispectral sensors, and its mouth was a complex arrangement of speaking apparatus designed for multiple atmospheric compositions. I am Harvester Prime Vex Haller of the Xenerch Supremacy, the creature announced in perfect English, its voice a disturbing harmony of artificial tones. You have proven more resilient than anticipated. We offer terms. Admiral Thorne's image appeared on the communication network, her face a mask of controlled fury. I'm listening. Your species demonstrates combat capabilities that warrant preservation. Surrender your fleet and submit to genetic harvest protocols. Your military leadership will be preserved as breeding stock while your population provides raw biological material for our expansion fleets. This is a generous offer. Most species we simply sterilize. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds before Thorne responded. Counteroffer, Harvester. Go back to whatever poison corner of the galaxy spawned you, and we won't turn your entire fleet into expanding clouds of plasma. Vex Haller's artificial features twisted into what might have been amusement, primitive aggression. How refreshing. Very well, we shall take what we require from your corpses. The channel cut, and within minutes, the combined Xenerch fleet was accelerating toward Earth at a velocity that should have torn their bioships apart. Somehow, they held together, their living hulls adapting to stresses that would have liquefied human crews, all vessels. Thorne commanded, implement defensive formation Echo 7. We're going to make them bleed for every kilometer. The deep fleet arranged itself in a layered defense between Earth and Luna, with the heaviest ships forming the outer shell, and faster destroyers positioned for hit-and-run attacks. It was a formation designed to maximize damage, while preserving as many vessels as possible, the kind of defensive strategy employed when defeat was inevitable, but survival was still worth fighting. For the first wave of bioships opened fire at maximum range, their weapons systems having been modified based on their analysis of human technology, instead of the broad-spectrum bioplasma that had proven vulnerable to deep fleet countermeasures. They fired concentrated streams of weaponized nanotechnology self-replicating machines that began consuming ship armor on contact and converting it into more nanites. The destroyer benthic storm was the first to fall, its hull dissolving as trillions of microscopic machines ate through every system aboard. Captain Nia Kelvin managed to transmit a final tactical report before her ship's reactor went critical, adding her voice to the growing list of deep fleet personnel who would never see Earth again. What humanity adapted to: all ships implement countermeasure Epsilon. Thorne commanded every vessel with electromagnetic pulse capability, full power. Now, 40 deep fleet ships discharged their EMP systems simultaneously, creating a localized electromagnetic storm that fried the alien nanites control systems. The weaponized machines turned on each other, consuming themselves in cascading feedback loops that left them inert and harmless. The Xenerch response was immediate and terrifying. The bioships began to physically transform, their hulls stretching and reconfiguring as new weapon systems grew from their living tissue. They had abandoned technological solutions in favor of pure biological adaptation, their ships literally evolving in real time to counter human defenses. "My God," whispered sensor operator Koskov. "They're not just ships, they're organisms, living, thinking, evolving organisms." The transformed bioships unleashed weapons that defied classification, exotic energy patterns that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human physics couldn't describe. The heavy cruiser Absol Depth simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but erased, as if it had never been built. Captain Radner watched 5 more ships vanish from his tactical display and realized that conventional warfare was useless against an enemy that could rewrite the laws of physics on demand. But humanity had one advantage that the Xenerch supremacy hadn't accounted for: their willingness to sacrifice everything for species survival. "Admiral," he transmitted to Thorne, "request permission to implement the Lazarus Protocol." There was a pause before Thorne responded, her voice heavy with the weight of absolute command. "Granted, all vessels are authorized for Lazarus implementation. Make them count." The Lazarus Protocol was the Deep Fleet's ultimate contingency, the conversion of starships into guided weapon systems by overloading their reactors and ramming them into enemy vessels. It was a tactic that guaranteed the destruction of both attacker and target, trading human lives for alien casualties at a 1-to-1 ratio across the battlefield. 18 Deep Fleet captains made the same terrible decision. The first ramming attack came from the destroyer Midnight Current, its captain Zarevex steering her ship directly into the bow of a biocruiser. While her reactor went supercritical, the explosion vaporized both vessels and sent shockwaves through the alien formation. But within minutes, the remaining Xenerch ships had adapted, growing additional armor layers and developing point defense systems specifically designed to intercept ramming attacks. By the time the last human kamikaze ship was destroyed, only 8 Xenerch vessels remained, but 22 Deep Fleet ships had been sacrificed to achieve that victory. The mathematics of attrition were clear. Humanity was losing this war, one heroic sacrifice at a time. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Vask, her voice barely audible, "we're receiving distress signals from the surface. The aliens have deployed atmospheric processors over major population centers. They're beginning the sterilization process." "Admiral." Thorne stared at the tactical display, watching red indicators spread across Earth's surface as alien bioweapons began converting the atmosphere into something suitable for Xenerch colonization. 2 billion people would be dead within 6 hours, and there was nothing the remaining Deep Fleet vessels could do to stop it. But sometimes, when the situation is truly hopeless, humans discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. "All remaining vessels," Thorne commanded, "prepare for final offensive. We're going to ram every last one of those bioships, and we're going to make sure none of them survive to see their victory." It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. But it was also humanity's final chance to ensure that their species didn't die quietly. The desperate plan lasted exactly 47 seconds, as the remaining 18 Deep Fleet vessels accelerated toward the Xenerch bioships in a final suicide charge. The aliens revealed why they had been so confident in their ultimate victory. The bioships began to merge, their living hulls flowing together like liquid metal, combining into three massive superorganisms that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed. Jesus Christ, whispered Captain Radner as his sensors registered. The transformed aliens, each merged bioship stretched over 30 kilometers in length, their hulls pulsing with energy patterns that bent local spacetime into defensive knots. They're not just adapting, they're evolving into something beyond our ability to damage. The suicide charges struck the merged bioships and simply stopped. The alien vessels absorbed the kinetic energy, incorporated the exploding human reactors into their own power systems, and grew even larger. 18 Deep Fleet ships died in those terrible moments, their crews vaporized as their own weapons were turned against them. Admiral Thorne watched the tactical display with the calm acceptance of someone who had run out of options. 3 ships remained: the Absol Fury, the command cruiser Deep Covenant, and the experimental destroyer Pressure Wave. Against them stood 3 alien superorganisms that had just demonstrated the ability to consume nuclear explosions and convert them into biological mass. "Sir," reported Intelligence Officer Drexen, his voice hollow with despair. "Surface monitoring stations indicate the atmospheric conversion process is accelerating. The aliens have deployed secondary bioweapons that are targeting human DNA. Specifically, they're not just sterilizing the planet, they're rewriting it at the molecular level." But Captain Jace Hollander, commanding the experimental destroyer Pressure Wave, had been running calculations that his crew thought indicated combat stress-induced breakdown. His ship was the testbed for humanity's most advanced theoretical weapon systems, so experimental that they had never been fully tested, because the energy requirements were beyond what any normal reactor could provide. "Admiral," Hollander transmitted, "I have an idea. It's completely insane, probably suicidal, and violates about 15 different international treaties. But it might work. I'm listening." "Captain, the Pressure Wave is equipped with prototype dimensional fracture weapons devices designed to tear holes in space-time itself. We've never used them because the power requirements would destroy the ship. But if we overload every reactor in the Deep Fleet network simultaneously and channel that energy through quantum entanglement." Thorne understood immediately. "You want to turn the entire ocean floor into a weapon." "Not just the ocean floor, Admiral. Every geothermal vent, every tectonic fault line, every volcanic system on Earth. The Deep Fleet's infrastructure taps directly into the planet's core energy systems. If we can channel that power through the dimensional fracture ray." It was theoretical physics pushed beyond the breaking point, the kind of desperate gamble that only made sense when the alternative was extinction. But the mathematics were sound theoretically. "Do it," Thorne commanded. "All vessels, prepare for total power transfer to the Pressure Wave. This is either going to save humanity or crack our planet like an egg." Deep beneath Earth's oceans, automated systems that had been installed over decades of secret construction began a process that had never been tested. Geothermal taps that normally powered underwater cities were rerouted into massive capacitors. Tectonic monitoring stations became energy collectors, drawing power directly from continental drift. Volcanic vents were transformed into conduits that channeled the planet's molten core into humanity's final weapon. The 3 Xenerch superorganisms detected the energy buildup and began their final approach, their biohulls glowing with anticipation as they prepared to harvest a dying species. They had seen this before, the last desperate gambit of a civilization that refused to accept inevitable defeat. It never worked. Captain Hollander watched his reactor systems redline as inconceivable. Amounts of energy flowed through his ship's experimental systems. His crew was already dead. The radiation levels would kill them within minutes. But the dimensional fracture ray was finally reaching operational parameters. "Target acquired," announced Weapons Officer Kira Nassam, her voice distorted by the energy field surrounding the bridge. "Firing solution locked on all 3 enemy vessels." "Fire," Hollander whispered. The Pressure Wave unleashed a weapon that existed at the intersection of human desperation and planetary-scale engineering. 3 beams of pure spatial distortion lanced out, each one carrying the accumulated thermal energy of Earth's geological systems. Where they struck the bioships, reality simply ceased to function properly. The first Xenerch superorganism was caught in a dimensional fold. that compressed 30 kilometers of living tissue into a space the size of a marble before exploding outward in a cascade of exotic particles. The second bioship tried to adapt, its hull flowing into new configurations, but the dimensional fracture was already spreading through its neural networks like cancer. The third alien vessel managed to partially shield itself, sacrificing half its mass to absorb the dimensional distortion. It survived, damaged but functional, its remaining weapons systems charging for a retaliatory strike that would turn Earth's surface into molten glass. That's when humanity played their final card. The pressure wave had been destroyed by its own weapon discharge. Captain Hollander and his crew vaporized by energies that should never have existed. But the dimensional fractures were still spreading, tears in space-time that were being sustained by the geological forces of an entire planet. Admiral Thorne, aboard the dying command cruiser Deep Covenant, made the last command decision of her career. Jex, she transmitted to Captain Radner, ram that last bioship. Channel everything we have left through the dimensional fractures. If we're going to die, we're taking them with us. The Absol Fury and Deep Covenant accelerated toward the surviving Xenerch superorganism, their crews accepting death with the grim satisfaction of soldiers who had found a way to make their sacrifice meaningful. But as they approached the alien vessel, something impossible happened. The dimensional fractures began to stabilize, sustained by quantum feedback loops from Earth's molten core. Instead of dissipating, they were growing stronger, creating a web of spatial distortions that trapped the surviving bioship in a cage of twisted space-time. The Xenerch superorganism found itself caught in a dimensional maze where forward led, backward, up led down, and time moved in directions that biological consciousness couldn't process. Its adaptive capabilities, so effective against conventional weapons, were useless against attacks that operated on the fundamental structure of reality itself, sir. Reported sensor operator Koskov from her dying console. The bioship it's coming apart, not from damage from spatial displacement. It's being spread across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The alien vessel's death scream was audible across subspace frequencies, a sound of agony that transcended species barriers. As it died, its biological systems released everything they had absorbed. During the battle, the matter and energy of dozens of destroyed human ships suddenly freed from their organic prison. The explosion was visible from Proxima Centauri, but humanity's victory came at a price that would reshape their understanding of physics forever. The dimensional fractures, stabilized by planetary scale engineering, had created permanent tears in local space-time. Earth now existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science couldn't map. The deep fleet was gone. The outer colonies were gone. 2 billion people had died in the atmospheric conversion process, but humanity had survived, and they had demonstrated something that would echo across the galaxy for millennia. When pushed to extinction, humans would literally break reality itself rather than surrender. The war was won, but the cosmos would never be the same. 3 months after the dimensional war, as historians would later call it, humanity discovered they were not alone in their suffering. The dimensional fractures that had saved Earth were spreading. Captain Mira Valdris, now commanding the rebuilt Deep Covenant II, stood on her bridge watching long-range sensors track the expanding web of spatial distortions. What had begun as localized tears in space-time around Earth's orbital zone had grown into a network of dimensional rifts stretching across half the solar system. Report, she ordered, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had been promoted far too quickly in the aftermath of near extinction. The fractures are destabilizing, sir, announced Science Officer Dex Meridian, his cybernetic implants struggling to process the impossible physics they were observing. They're creating resonance cascades throughout local space. And sir, we're detecting massive fleet movements at the edge of the Helix Nebula. Someone's coming. The something was the hegemony of worlds, a coalition of 17 species that had been fighting the Xenerch supremacy for over 2 centuries. They had detected the dimensional distortions and come to investigate what they assumed was a new Xenerch bioweapon. Instead, they found a primitive species that had accidentally created the most dangerous spatial anomaly in recorded galactic history. Admiral Elena Vasquez, the new commander of what remained of the Deep Fleet, received the first diplomatic contact in human history from her command center, now relocated to a mobile platform hidden in the asteroid belt. The alien transmission was clear, urgent, and absolutely terrifying. Human vessel. This is Battle Commander Orthax of the Hegemony 3rd Fleet, your dimensional manipulations have created a cascade effect that threatens 17 inhabited systems. You will immediately cease all dimensional weapon research and submit to hegemony oversight, or we will be forced to sterilize your system for galactic security. The ultimatum gave humanity 72 hours to comply. Admiral Vasquez stared at the tactical display showing 43 hegemony warships, sleek technological marvels that made human engineering look primitive. Unlike the organic bioships of the Xenerch, these were pure military efficiency, angular hulls bristling with weapons systems, energy shields that could deflect planetary bombardments, and FTL drives that allowed for tactical jumps during combat. Options? Vasquez asked her staff. Limited, replied General Strix Carden, the Deep Fleet's chief tactical officer. We have 18 operational vessels, mostly cobbled together from salvage. They have 43 ships with technology at least 50 years ahead of ours. In a straight fight, we'd last maybe 20 minutes. But Captain Valdris had been studying the dimensional fractures for 3 months, and she had discovered something that would change the nature of warfare forever. Admiral, she transmitted from the Deep Covenant to, the fractures aren't just random tears in space-time. They're creating stable wormhole networks. We can use them for tactical advantage. The plan was insane, but it was the only chance humanity had. Instead of fighting the hegemony fleet in normal space, they would use the dimensional rifts as a combat arena, forcing the enemy to engage in an environment where conventional tactics meant nothing. When the 72-hour deadline expired, Admiral Vasquez transmitted humanity's response. Hegemony fleet, this is Admiral Vasquez of the Terran Deep Fleet. We reject your ultimatum. If you want to sterilize our system, you'll have to do it the hard way. The Battle of the Fractures began at 1400 hours, Terran Standard Time. The hegemony fleet approached Earth in perfect formation, their energy shields creating a wall of defensive power that could withstand anything in humanity's conventional arsenal. Battle Commander Orthax was confident this would be a quick engagement, a demonstration of superior firepower that would end with human surrender and minimal casualties. He was wrong. The first indication that this would not be a conventional battle came when the human ships simply vanished. Sensors show no debris, reported the hegemony fleet's tactical officer. They appear to have entered the dimensional anomalies voluntarily. Orthax studied the battle display with growing unease. The spatial rifts were creating sensor shadows, areas where conventional detection systems simply stopped functioning. The humans had disappeared into that blind zone, and there was no way to track them. Fleet advance, maintain formation, and watch for. The attack came from above, below, and through dimensions that shouldn't have existed. Captain Valdris brought the Deep Covenant through a dimensional rift, directly above the hegemony flagship, her ship's experimental weapons firing. Plasma torpedoes enhanced with spatial distortion fields. The weapons struck the alien vessel shields and didn't bounce off, they tunneled through, bypassing the energy barriers entirely and detonating inside the ship's hull. The hegemony flagship Stellar Dominion died in the first 30 seconds of combat, its reactor core breached by weapons that attacked from impossible angles. But the aliens adapted quickly. All vessels, disperse formation. Orthax commanded from his backup ship. Implement anti-dimensional countermeasures. They're using the spatial rifts for tactical advantage. The hegemony fleet spread out and began deploying specialized weapons, designed to destabilize the dimensional fractures, energy beams that could collapse wormholes, gravitational mines that sealed spatial rifts, exotic matter torpedoes that restored normal physics to localized areas. Humanity's advantage lasted exactly 12 minutes. The destroyer pressure ridge was caught in a collapsing dimensional rift. Its hull compressed between normal space and twisted dimensions until it folded in on itself. Captain Coulter managed to transmit a final tactical update. Before his ship was reduced to a space-time smear, they're sealing the rifts, he reported. We're losing our mobility advantage. Admiral Vasquez watched her tactical display as, one by one, the dimensional fractures began to collapse under hegemony weapons fire. Soon, the battle would return to normal space, where human ships would be easy targets for superior alien technology. But Science Officer Meridian had been running calculations based on the fracture's collapse patterns. Admiral, he transmitted, if we can synchronize our remaining dimensional weapons and fire them simultaneously into the largest rift, we might be able to create a cascading resonance that would what? Commander, that would tear a hole in space-time big enough to swallow both fleets, sir. Possibly both star systems. It was the Lazarus Protocol on a cosmic scale, mutual assured destruction using the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Admiral Vasquez looked at her display showing 6 human ships against 37 alien vessels. With Earth's population hanging in the balance, do it, she ordered. Every remaining Deep Fleet vessel converged on the largest dimensional rift, their experimental weapons charging for one final, synchronized discharge. But the Hegemony fleet realized what was happening and responded with everything they had. The space around the dimensional rift became a killing field of energy beams, plasma cannons, exotic matter warheads, and weapons that humanity didn't have. Names for the destroyer Absol Current was vaporized by a concentrated barrage. The cruiser Deep Thunder lost half its hull to a gravitational weapon that folded space around it. Captain Valdres watched her ship's armor boil away under alien fire as she fought to maintain course toward the target rift. Her crew was dying. Around her, her bridge was decompressing, and her reactor was 30 seconds from critical overload. Dimensional weapon ready, announced Weapons Officer Tana Corvell, blood streaming from her cybernetic implants. Firing solution locked. All vessels, Admiral Vasquez transmitted on the emergency frequency. Fire on my mark. It's been an honor serving with you all. 6 human ships discharged their dimensional weapons simultaneously, pouring the accumulated energy of a dying civilization into a single point in space-time. The largest dimensional rift absorbed the energy, expanded, and began to tear reality apart at the seams. The explosion consumed both fleets. When the light faded, nothing remained but expanding clouds of exotic particles and a permanent scarring. Space-time that would be visible to astronomers for the next million years. Humanity had won by destroying everything, including themselves. But in the deepest trenches of Earth's oceans, automated systems continued their ancient purpose, and the Deep Fleet's legacy was far from over. 6 months after the Battle of the Fractures, the galaxy came calling again. The Hegemony's 3rd Fleet had been completely destroyed, but their death screams had been heard across 17 star systems. Now the full might of the coalition was assembling over 300 warships, representing the military forces of multiple species, all united by a single terrifying realization: humanity had weaponized space-time itself. Commander Zoe Blackwell stood in the emergency command center that had been hastily constructed in the Mariana Trench, watching long-range sensors track the approaching armada. She was 28 years old, promoted from lieutenant to fleet commander because most of her senior officers were dead, as she was about to face the largest military force in galactic history with exactly 0 functional starships. Status report, she ordered, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The automated shipyards are working at maximum capacity, reported Chief Engineer Knox Tavarin, his cybernetic arm interfacing directly with the construction systems. We've got 17 vessels in various stages of completion, but none of them will be ready for at least 3 weeks. The enemy fleet arrives in 4 days. It should have been hopeless. Earth's population had been reduced to 4 billion by the atmospheric conversion weapons. The outer colonies were gone, and humanity's only space-based military assets were orbital debris and radioactive gas clouds. But the dimensional war had changed something fundamental about human technology. What about the prototype drives? Blackwell asked. Tavarin's expression was grim, functional, but completely untested. We've incorporated Xenerch biotechnology salvaged from the first battle with Hegemony energy. Systems recovered from the fracture. So the result is unprecedented. Dr. Vera Solis, the Deep Fleet's chief scientist, looked up from her holographic displays. Commander, we're not just building ships anymore. We're building something that's part machine, part organism, part spatial distortion. These vessels exist partially in normal space and partially in the dimensional fracture network. They're not bound by conventional physics. The approaching Hegemony force was under the command of Supreme Admiral Kethvaran, a career military officer who had spent centuries fighting the most dangerous species in the galaxy. He had come to Earth expecting to face a primitive civilization that had stumbled on a dangerous technology. Instead, his intelligence reports painted a picture of a species that had somehow survived extinction events that should have been unsurvivable. Battle Commander, his tactical officer reported, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the 3rd planet's ocean floors. The humans appeared to be constructing something. Kethvaran studied the sensor readings with growing unease. The energy patterns were unlike anything in the Hegemony's databases of fugitive technologies, from multiple species combined with spatial distortions that shouldn't be stable. Maintain approach vector, he ordered, but prepare contingency protocols. These humans have already proven they're willing to destroy themselves rather than surrender. On Earth, the first of humanity's new vessels was rising from the Puerto Rico Trench. The synthesis was unlike anything that had ever existed. Its hull flowed like liquid metal, but pulsed with organic rhythms. Dimensional rifts opened and closed along its surface, creating weapon ports that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its crew of 50 operated through direct neural interface with both the ship's computer systems and its living components. Captain Luna Reyes, the synthesis's commander, felt her consciousness merge with her vessel as it breached the ocean's surface. She could sense every system, every weapon, every spatial distortion that surrounded her ship like a living aura. It was beautiful and terrifying. All stations report ready, announced her tactical officer, though the words were transmitted through thought rather than speech. Dimensional drives are stable. Bioplasma weapons are charged. Spatial distortion field is active. The synthesis was followed by 16 more vessels, each one a unique fusion of technologies that represented humanity's evolution from a species that built tools to a species that became their tools. They rose from ocean trenches around the globe, their hulls gleaming with impossible geometries as they prepared to face the largest fleet ever assembled. The battle began when the hegemony force reached Mars orbit. Supreme Admiral Kefferin had arranged his 300 ships in a defensive wall designed to contain any dimensional attacks, while providing overlapping fields of fire. It was a formation that had proven effective against Xenerch biofleets and a dozen other dangerous species. It was completely useless against an enemy that could attack from parallel dimensions. The first wave of human ships simply stepped sideways, out of normal space, reappearing inside the hegemony formation with their weapons already firing. The synthesis materialized directly above the command dreadnought Hegemony's Pride, its bioplasma cannons discharging streams of weaponized organic matter enhanced with dimensional distortion fields. The alien flagship shields absorbed the initial impact, but the bioplasma began eating through the energy barriers, converting shield generators into more organic matter that spread throughout the ship's systems. Within minutes, the Hegemony's Pride was being consumed from the inside out. But Kefferin had brought more than overwhelming numbers. He had brought weapons specifically designed to counter dimensional manipulation. All vessels implement protocol null space, he commanded as his flagship died around him. Seal local dimensions, force them back into normal space. The Hegemony fleet deployed reality anchors devices that locked space-time into conventional configurations and prevented dimensional manipulation within their area of effect. Suddenly, the human ships found themselves trapped in normal space. Their primary advantage neutralized, the response was immediate and devastating. 300 alien warships opened fire simultaneously, their combined firepower enough to sterilize a planet. The destroyer convergence was vaporized instantly. The cruiser dimensional echo lasted for seconds before its hull was reduced to component atoms. Captain Reyes felt her ship's biohull absorbing damage, its living systems trying desperately to adapt to weapons that operated on principles of pure destruction. The synthesis was dying, its organic components literally being unraveled by exotic energy beams. Commander, she transmitted to BlackHFY, the reality anchors are preventing dimensional transit. We're trapped in a conventional engagement we can't win. But Dr. Solis had been monitoring the battle from the command center, and she had realized something that would change everything. The anchors work by creating localized areas of stable space-time, she explained rapidly. But they're powered by conventional energy sources. If we can overload them, how? BlackHFY demanded. The dimensional fractures aren't gone, they're just suppressed. If we can channel enough energy through them simultaneously, we can create a resonance cascade that will shatter every reality anchor in the fleet. It meant sacrificing every human ship in a coordinated energy discharge that would probably tear apart local space-time, but it would also free humanity's surviving vessels to use their dimensional capabilities. All ships, BlackHFY transmitted. Implement Protocol Genesis. Channel everything through the fracture network. On my mark, 17 human vessels, each one a fusion of technologies that shouldn't exist, prepared to commit suicide for the chance to turn the tide of battle. Their crews felt their consciousness merge completely with their ships as biological, mechanical, and dimensional systems synchronized for one final discharge. Mark, BlackHFY whispered. The energy release was visible from Jupiter. 17 ships died. Their crews vaporized as exotic energies tore through holes designed to withstand impossible stress. But their sacrifice shattered every reality anchor in the hegemony fleet, creating a localized zone where physics became optional, and dimensional manipulation was not just possible, but inevitable. The surviving fragments of the human fleet pieces of destroyed ships that had somehow retained coherent consciousness began to reassemble themselves. Using dimensional energy, ship components that should have been debris started flowing together, guided by the neural patterns of their dead crews. Captain Reyes found herself still conscious despite the fact that her ship had been destroyed. Her awareness existed in the dimensional fractures themselves, controlling fragments of biotech and alien technology that swirled through twisted space like living storms. "This is impossible," Supreme Admiral Kithvaran muttered as his sensors tried to track enemies that existed as much as concept as physical reality. The final phase of the battle took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with human consciousness directing technology that had transcended the normal boundaries between organic and artificial, between tool and user. The hegemony fleet found itself fighting ghosts made of living metal and weaponized physics. When the battle ended, only 57 hegemony ships remained, fleeing toward the edge of the solar system with their reality anchors restored and their confidence shattered. They had fought primitive humans and been defeated by something that was no longer entirely human. Commander Blackwell watched the tactical display as the enemy fleet retreated, then looked at the readings from Earth's orbital space. The dimensional fractures had stabilized again, but now they pulsed with patterns that seemed almost like neural activity. "Sir," reported Dr. Solis, "we're receiving transmissions from the fracture network. It's Captain Reyes and her crew. They're still alive, but they exist as information patterns within the dimensional matrix. Humanity had won, but they had paid for victory by becoming something beyond biological existence. The line between human and technology, between consciousness and physics, had been permanently blurred. The deep fleet was gone, but in its place was something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had learned to weaponize reality itself and had become immortal in the process. 1 year after the Battle of the Dimensions, the galaxy was forced to acknowledge a new reality. Humanity had become something unprecedented. The hegemony survivors had spread word across 17 systems about the species that could not be killed, could not be contained, and existed as much in folded space-time as in normal reality. Ships reported encounters with human vessels that appeared from nowhere, delivered diplomatic messages, and vanished back into dimensional fractures that followed no known laws of physics. Commander Zoe Blackwell, now bearing the title of Fleet Admiral despite commanding vessels that existed only partially in normal space, stood in the rebuilt Deep Fleet Command Center. The facility had been expanded throughout the ocean floor, its corridors and chambers extending through dimensional folds. That made its true size impossible to calculate. "Status report," she requested, though the words were as much thought as speech in the quantum-enhanced communication system. "The reconstruction fleets have restored basic infrastructure to Mars and the asteroid belt," reported Captain Luna Reyes, her consciousness manifesting as a shimmering hologram that occasionally flickered through multiple dimensions. "The outer colonies are being rebuilt, but with dimensional anchor points that make them effectively immune to conventional attack." Reyes had been the first to successfully transition from biological existence to distributed consciousness within the fracture network. Her crew had followed, becoming the core of humanity's new form of existence. They were still human in thought and purpose, but they commanded technology that operated beyond the traditional boundaries of physics. Dr. Vera Solis materialized beside them, her form more stable since she had chosen to maintain a partially biological existence. "The diplomatic situation is complex. 17 species have requested non-aggression treaties, 12 have offered technology exchanges, and 3 have asked for our protection against Xenert's remnant fleets." The transformation had not been limited to military personnel. Across Earth, humans were discovering that exposure to dimensional energy had fundamentally altered their relationship with technology. Children born after the dimensional wars could interface directly with quantum systems, and adults found themselves capable of perceiving multiple dimensions simultaneously. "What about the Xenert supremacy?" Blackwell asked, collapsing. Reyes reported with satisfaction that transcended her distributed existence. "Our dimensional scouts have located their core systems. They're facing simultaneous rebellions from conquered species who have learned that the supremacy can be defeated. We've been providing assistance. The assistance included dimensional weapons delivered through fractured networks that the Xenerch bioships couldn't detect or counter. Entire supremacy fleets had been destroyed by attacks that materialized from folded space, leaving no trace of their origin. But humanity's greatest achievement was not military, it was the discovery that consciousness itself could exist independently of biological substrate when properly integrated with dimensional field systems. Admiral Elena Vasquez appeared in the command center, her form flickering between the appearance she had possessed in life and abstract patterns of pure information. She had died in the first dimensional battle, but her neural patterns had been preserved in the fractured network's quantum matrices. The Council of Species has agreed to our terms, she announced. Formal recognition of humanity as a dimensional power, with territorial sovereignty extending through both normal space and parallel dimensional layers. They're also requesting our assistance in establishing defensive dimensional fields around their core systems. It was more than victory, it was transformation from a species struggling for survival to the galaxy's ultimate arbiters of dimensional warfare. Chief Engineer Nox Tavarin manifested beside them, his consciousness now distributed across every automated shipyard in the solar system. The new generation of hybrid vessels is ready for deployment. Ships that exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, crewed by consciousness patterns that can't be killed by conventional weapons. The vessels emerging from Earth's dimensional shipyards were works of art as much as weapons of war. They flowed through space like living things, their hulls shifting between solid matter and pure energy as tactical requirements demanded. Their crews existed as distributed consciousness patterns that could transfer between ships instantaneously, making them effectively immortal and infinitely adaptable. But perhaps the most significant development was taking place on Earth itself. The dimensional fractures had begun to stabilize into permanent features of local space-time, creating zones where the boundary between thought and reality was permeable. Humans living near these areas reported enhanced creativity, expanded perception, and the ability to manipulate probability through focused intention. Sir, Dr. Solis reported, the children born in the dimensional zones are demonstrating capabilities we're still trying to understand. They can perceive quantum possibilities directly, manipulate matter at the molecular level through thought alone, and communicate across interstellar distances through quantum entanglement. Humanity was evolving, not through biological adaptation, but through integration with the fundamental forces of the universe itself. The transformation was not without cost. Many humans struggled with the transition from purely biological existence to hybrid consciousness patterns. Others found the expanded awareness overwhelming, requiring careful integration with dimensional support systems to maintain psychological stability. But for those who successfully made the transition, the rewards were unprecedented. Captain Jex Radner materialized in the command center, his consciousness pattern more stable than most since he had been one of the first to volunteer for full dimensional integration. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Xenerch home system. They're requesting surrender terms. The communication that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The Xenerch supremacy, which had conquered and consumed hundreds of species across millennia, was offering unconditional surrender to a species they had once considered primitive. We acknowledge the dominance of the human dimensional empire. The transmission stated, we request mercy and the preservation of our remaining populations. We offer our complete technological databases and surrender of all occupied territories in exchange for cessation of dimensional attacks. Admiral Blackwell considered the offer while simultaneously monitoring reports from across the galaxy. Human dimensional scouts were operating in 47 star systems, providing advance warning of threats and technological assistance to species that had signed non-aggression treaties. The old galactic order, based on territorial control and resource extraction, was being replaced by something entirely new. Transmit our response, Blackwell decided. Unconditional surrender accepted. All Xenerch military forces will be disbanded. Occupied species will receive full independence and dimensional protection protocols. Xenerch civilians will be relocated to designated systems under human oversight. It was magnanimous by the standards of galactic warfare, but it also established humanity as the ultimate arbiters of interstellar law. As the command staff discussed implementation details, Blackwell found herself contemplating the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, humanity had been facing extinction. at the hands of alien bioweapons. Now they existed as immortal consciousness patterns distributed across dimensional networks that span the galaxy. What do you think the next challenge will be? She asked her senior staff. Captain Rey's form shimmered with something that might have been amusement. Sir, we've just established dimensional sovereignty over half the galaxy, transformed human consciousness into something that can exist independently of biological substrate, and achieved effective immortality for our species. I think the next challenge will be figuring out what to do with infinite possibility. The deep fleet was gone, but in its place was something the universe had never seen: a species that had weaponized reality itself and emerged from near extinction. As the galaxy's new architects of space-time, Earth's oceans still held their secrets, but now those secrets extended through dimensions where depth was measured in impossibility, and the abyss had no bottom. Humanity had learned that sometimes, when you stare into the darkness long enough, you don't just become the darkness, you become something the darkness fears. In the deepest trenches of space and time, where pressure could crush stars and cold could freeze possibility itself, humanity had built something eternal. They had surprised the outer moons, but Earth's deep fleet had been awake all along, dreaming dreams that bent reality and waiting for the moment when the universe would learn what humans keep in their deepest waters. The war was over, the transformation had begun, and in the spaces between dimensions, consciousness patterns that had once been human contemplated infinite tomorrows, with the patience of the truly immortal and the wisdom of those who had paid the ultimate price for their species' survival. The deep fleet lived on, not as ships or weapons, but as the living embodiment of humanity's refusal to surrender, their essence distributed across the quantum foam of space-time itself, eternal guardians of a universe that would never again underestimate the species that learned to dream in dimensions and wage war with reality itself.